In a city full of towering skyscrapers and busy streets, there lived a millionaire named Mr. Hargrave. He was a man who had everything: luxurious cars, a huge mansion, and a life that most people only dreamt of. From the outside, his life looked perfect. People admired him, his wealth was well known, and he had access to anything money could buy. But inside, Mr. Hargrave often felt a quiet emptiness. His life was filled with meetings, business deals, and endless responsibilities. He rarely had time to notice the small things that made life beautiful, like the laughter of children playing on the street or the simple joy of a kind gesture. To him, life had become a routine of numbers, accounts, and obligations, and even though he had so much, he sometimes wondered if he had lost touch with what really mattered. On one ordinary morning, the city was buzzing with activity. Cars honked, people hurried down the sidewalks, and the air was filled with the usual sounds of city life. Mr. Hargrave, sitting in his spacious office, was going through papers and emails as usual, his mind consumed by work. His office, decorated with expensive paintings and furniture, felt cold and formal. While he sat in the comfort of his chair, sipping his morning coffee, he heard a soft knock at the door. It was unusual for anyone to visit without an appointment, especially someone who wanted to see him personally. He looked up, curious, and called out, "Come in." The door opened slowly, and a young boy stepped inside. He was not dressed in fancy clothes or carrying anything that would suggest he belonged in the millionaire's world. Instead, he looked ordinary, with slightly messy hair and simple clothes. Yet, there was something about him, an air of honesty, a quiet confidence that made him stand out. The boy held something tightly in his hands, wrapped carefully as if it were very precious. He approached Mr. Hargrave and politely said, "Sir, your son gave me this shirt yesterday." Mr. Hargrave froze for a moment, unsure if he had heard correctly. His son. The millionaire had always been proud of his son but had assumed that the boy, like him, lived in a world of comfort and privilege. Why would his son give something away, and why to a stranger? Mr. Hargrave leaned back in his chair, curiosity mixed with confusion. He gestured for the boy to sit, but the boy remained standing, holding out the shirt as if waiting for a response. The room was silent for a few moments, filled only with the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant sounds of the city below. As Mr. Hargrave looked at the shirt, he noticed that it was not new or expensive. It had been worn, washed many times, and carried a few small stains. It was the kind of shirt that most people would consider ordinary, unremarkable, and certainly not valuable to someone who had everything. Yet, in the hands of this young boy, it seemed important. There was a story behind it, a reason it had been given, and Mr. Hargrave could sense that something meaningful was about to unfold. The boy's expression was calm and sincere. He did not fidget or hesitate, but his eyes reflected a quiet seriousness. He seemed aware of the weight of the moment, and yet he spoke with a simplicity that cut through all the complexities of Mr. Hargrave's wealthy world. There was no pretense, no fear, and no expectation, only honesty and a story that needed to be told. Mr. Hargrave felt a mix of emotions, curiosity, pride, and even a little nervousness. He realized that he did not yet know the full story, and somehow, he felt that this simple act might teach him something important, something he had forgotten in his busy life. For a moment, he thought back to his own childhood and his father's lessons, and he realized that some of the most valuable lessons he had ever learned had come not from books or money, but from small, meaningful gestures and acts of kindness. Perhaps, he thought, his son had learned something similar, and now it was being shared through this boy. The city outside continued its busy rhythm, but inside the office, time seemed to slow down. The ordinary shirt, the boy's calm presence, and the quiet words hung in the air like a promise. Something remarkable was about to happen, and Mr. Hargrave could feel it in his chest. As he took a deep breath, he decided to listen, really listen, to what the boy had to say. He leaned forward, his eyes fixed on the young visitor, and prepared to discover a story that he had never expected, one that would challenge his assumptions, touch his heart, and perhaps even change the way he saw his own life and his son forever. The boy stood quietly in the middle of the millionaire's grand office, holding the worn shirt in his small hands, and Mr. Hargrave stared at it with a mixture of confusion and curiosity. The air was heavy with anticipation, and for a moment, it felt as if time itself had slowed down. The boy took a small, steady breath and spoke again. "Sir, your son gave me this shirt yesterday," and the words, though simple, carried a weight that Mr. Hargrave could not ignore. The millionaire's mind raced, trying to make sense of it. He had never expected something so ordinary to hold any importance, not in a life filled with gold, jewels, and luxury. Yet, the boy's calm expression and the way he held the shirt made it clear that there was more to this small piece of clothing than met the eye. Mr. Hargrave leaned back in his chair, curiosity battling with skepticism, and asked, "Why did he give it to you?" The boy's eyes were honest, unwavering, and he said softly, "It was a gift for someone who needed it more than I did, sir. Your son thought it would help someone who did not have enough clothes, and he wanted to make sure they felt warm and cared for." Mr. Hargrave's eyes widened as he looked at the shirt again. The thought that his son had quietly given something personal, without seeking attention or praise, touched a part of him that money had never reached. The boy continued, explaining how his day had unfolded, how he had met a young man who lived on the streets, cold and hungry, and how your son had noticed the man shivering. Without saying a word to anyone else, he had simply taken off his shirt and offered it, showing a kindness that came naturally, without the need for recognition. Mr. Hargrave felt a strange mix of pride and disbelief. The boy's words painted a picture of a generosity so pure that it seemed almost impossible to believe, yet the sincerity in his voice left no room for doubt. The millionaire could not help but recall his son's usual life, full of school, friends, and hobbies, never expecting him to perform a quiet act of compassion like this, and yet, here it was, presented to him in a simple shirt, carrying a story of empathy that transcended wealth or status. The boy's presence, humble and unassuming, made the gift feel even more significant. It was not the shirt itself that mattered. It was the thought, the intention, and the courage behind it. Mr. Hargrave leaned forward, resting his elbows on his desk, fascinated by the story. He asked the boy to describe exactly how the gift had been given, wanting to understand every detail. The boy explained how he had been at the park when your son approached him, handed him the shirt carefully, and smiled warmly, saying, "Take this to someone who needs it more than me." That small act, performed with no witnesses and no applause, was now unraveling before Mr. Hargrave like a beautiful secret. The millionaire felt an unexpected emotion rising inside him, something he rarely experienced. Humility. The boy, despite being much younger and far less experienced in the world, had become the messenger of a lesson that money could never teach. The gift of the shirt, so simple yet so meaningful, symbolized a kindness that could never be bought. Mr. Hargrave realized that he had been blind to these small gestures, so focused on wealth and success that he had forgotten the true value of giving. As the boy finished telling the story, he placed the shirt gently on the desk, and there was silence, a silence full of understanding. Mr. Hargrave could feel the weight of the moment, and he knew that this ordinary shirt had become extraordinary because of the extraordinary heart behind it. It was more than a piece of clothing, it was a symbol of compassion, empathy, and the kind of selfless generosity that could change lives. For the first time in a long while, Mr. Hargrave's eyes filled with a quiet admiration, not just for the boy who had brought the shirt, but for his son, whose thoughtful action had created a ripple of goodness in the world. He realized that sometimes the smallest things, an ordinary shirt, a simple smile, a quiet act of giving, could have the greatest impact, and that this story, which started with a small gift, was only the beginning of a lesson that would stay with him forever. The boy took a deep breath and began to tell his story, his voice calm but full of meaning. "Yesterday was different," he said. "I was walking through the park when your son saw me." Mr. Hargrave listened intently, leaning forward in his chair, his eyes fixed on the boy as if he could already see the scene unfolding in front of him. The room felt quieter somehow, the sounds of the city fading into the background as the story took center stage. The boy described the park as he had seen it that day, children playing, people jogging, dogs running freely, and the wind softly brushing through the trees. It had been an ordinary day, yet for someone who had very little, every ordinary day was a challenge. He explained how he had noticed a man sitting on a worn bench, looking tired, hungry, and cold. His clothes were old and tattered, and his shoes had holes, making the young boy feel an immediate pang of sympathy. "Your son didn't speak much at first," the boy continued. He just watched for a moment, then slowly walked over. He smiled at the man and said, "I want to help you." Mr. Hargrave's heart skipped a beat as he imagined his son, always so curious and playful, standing there with such thoughtfulness. The idea that his child had recognized someone else's need before thinking of himself struck him deeply. The boy recounted how his son had gently taken off his own shirt, folded it neatly, and handed it to the man with care. He didn't make a big deal, the boy said. He didn't shout or call anyone to watch. He just quietly did it, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. Mr. Hargrave felt a lump in his throat. Amazed at the humility and kindness of his son, he realized that these were the moments money could never buy, moments of genuine humanity and empathy. The boy continued, describing how the man's eyes lit up with surprise and gratitude, how he looked at the shirt as though it were a treasure, because, in a way, it was. He explained how your son had knelt beside him, made sure the shirt was comfortable, and even smiled in a way that seemed to say, "You are not forgotten. You matter." Mr. Hargrave's mind raced, imagining the impact of such a small gesture, and he felt a mix of pride, awe, and a little shame that he had not seen this in his own life. The boy paused for a moment, letting the weight of his words sink in, and then, he said, "He asked me to take it to someone who might need it more, and that's when I came to you, sir." Mr. Hargrave's eyes widened in astonishment, realizing that the boy had become a messenger of his son's compassion, carrying a story that would forever change how he viewed his child and perhaps even himself. He noticed the sincerity in the boy's eyes, the way every word he spoke was carefully chosen, honest, and heartfelt. There was no exaggeration, no attempt to impress, only a simple recounting of events that spoke volumes about character and integrity. Mr. Hargrave understood then that the boy's story was more than just about a shirt. It was about the courage to care, the quiet power of empathy, and the importance of noticing the world beyond oneself. As the story unfolded, Mr. Hargrave reflected on his own life, on how often he had overlooked the needs of others while chasing wealth and status, on how he had forgotten that even small actions could make someone's world brighter. The boy's account made him see that life was not about possessions, but about the way people touched each other's hearts, and how simple acts of kindness could ripple through the world in ways that money never could. The boy concluded his story with a gentle smile. "Your son didn't want anything in return, sir. He only wanted to help." Mr. Hargrave sat silently, letting the words sink in, feeling a mix of admiration, gratitude, and a quiet awe for the young soul who had acted with such selflessness. He realized that this moment, this story, would stay with him forever, a reminder that sometimes the most profound lessons come from the simplest acts. In that moment, the ordinary office, with its polished floors and expensive furniture, seemed less important, and the worn shirt on the desk became a symbol of something extraordinary. The boy's story had begun to reveal the heart of the lesson, that generosity, empathy, and courage can exist in anyone, regardless of age or status, and that sometimes, the smallest gestures can leave the deepest impact. Mr. Hargrave leaned back in his luxurious chair, staring at the boy as he processed everything he had just heard. The story seemed almost unreal, yet the boy's calm, honest eyes left no room for doubt. He felt a strange mix of emotions, pride for his son, awe at the simplicity of the act, and confusion about how something so ordinary could hold such extraordinary meaning. For a moment, he found himself speechless, a feeling he rarely experienced, accustomed as he was to being in control, to making decisions and solving problems quickly. Here was a situation where no amount of money, power, or influence could have created the outcome. It was raw, genuine, and entirely human. The simplicity of the gesture stunned him, and yet, it carried a weight far heavier than anything he had ever possessed. The boy, sensing the silence, shifted slightly but remained composed. His hands still held the shirt carefully, as if the fabric itself contained the story he had been entrusted to deliver. Mr. Hargrave cleared his throat, trying to find words that could match the depth of the moment. "Your son, he gave this away. Just like that?" he asked, his voice a mixture of disbelief and wonder. "Yes, sir," the boy replied softly. "He didn't tell anyone. He didn't ask for thanks. He just wanted to help someone who needed it more than he did." Those words echoed in Mr. Hargrave's mind, and he realized that his son had done something profoundly simple yet infinitely meaningful. he remembered how often he himself had focused on wealth, appearances, and status, rarely pausing to notice the small opportunities to make a real difference. As he thought about it, a rush of admiration filled him, mingled with humility. Here was his child, young and inexperienced by worldly standards, yet demonstrating a wisdom he, as an adult, sometimes struggled to achieve, the act of giving a shirt, not money or gifts, just a piece of clothing, carried a lesson far greater than any lecture or sermon could. Mr. Hargrave felt a sense of warmth spreading through him, a feeling that had been absent for years. He realized that the boy's story was teaching him something vital, that true generosity is quiet, selfless, and without expectation. Unlike the grand gestures of business or wealth, this act was intimate, personal, and entirely sincere. It reminded him that the greatest value often comes from thoughtfulness, care, and empathy, qualities that money cannot buy. His mind drifted to images of his son walking through the park, spotting someone in need, carefully taking off his own shirt and offering it without hesitation. The picture was so vivid that it almost felt like he had witnessed it himself. The thought filled him with an unexpected emotion, a mixture of pride, love, and a kind of awe he rarely experienced. At the same time, he couldn't help but feel a twinge of regret, realizing how often he had overlooked small gestures of kindness in his own life, how he had sometimes measured success by numbers and possessions rather than compassion and integrity. The boy's story, simple as it seemed, had become a mirror, reflecting back the parts of himself he had neglected or forgotten. He glanced at the young messenger, seeing not just the boy, but the connection between the boy and his son. The act of kindness had created a bridge, one that linked hearts, values, and lessons in a way that no wealth could ever replicate. Mr. Hargrave understood that the shirt on the desk was more than fabric. It was a symbol, a lesson, a testament to the quiet power of empathy and selflessness. Finally, he spoke, his voice filled with both wonder and gratitude. I never expected this. My son, he has a heart far bigger than I realized. The boy nodded, knowing that his words had delivered the message he was meant to share. There was a sense of closure in the air, yet also a spark, a realization that this moment marked the beginning of something larger. In that office, amidst polished floors, expensive furniture, and city noise, Mr. Hargrave experienced a shift, subtle yet profound. He realized that wealth could never replace the lessons of kindness, that the smallest acts could hold the greatest meaning, and that his son, through a simple shirt, had reminded him of the human values he had almost forgotten. The millionaire's reaction was not one of loud praise or dramatic gestures. It was quieter, more profound, a deep understanding that touched the core of his being. He knew he would never look at his son the same way again, and he also knew that his life, his priorities, and his perception of what truly mattered were about to change forever. The boy took another breath and continued, his eyes steady and honest. Sir, there's something else you should know, he said, and Mr. Hargrave leaned forward immediately, sensing that this was the moment he had been waiting for. He felt a mixture of curiosity and nervous anticipation, wondering what could possibly make this simple act of kindness even more remarkable. The boy began explaining in detail how the shirt had not only been given as an act of generosity but also as a deliberate lesson. Your son noticed someone who needed help, yes, the boy said, but he also wanted to show that kindness doesn't need to be shown to impress others. He wanted to teach that helping comes from the heart, not for reward or recognition. Mr. Hargrave felt a shiver run through him as he absorbed the weight of those words. He realized that his son's quiet gesture had layers of intention he had never imagined. It was not merely a shirt, it was a symbol, a deliberate choice to act selflessly and inspire empathy. The thought that his child had thought so deeply about kindness, even at such a young age, filled him with astonishment and pride, mixed with a quiet humility. The boy continued, recounting how his son had carefully chosen who would receive the shirt, observing without interfering, and making sure that the act would make the greatest difference. He didn't just give it away randomly, the boy said. He watched, he waited, and then he acted when it mattered most, so the person receiving it would truly feel cared for and respected. Mr. Hargrave could almost picture his son standing there, quietly thinking, planning, and acting, with patience far beyond his years. For the first time, Mr. Hargrave understood the deeper meaning behind his son's actions. He saw that this was more than a simple act of generosity. It was a lesson in empathy, responsibility, and moral courage, he felt a mixture of admiration and awe, realizing that his son had quietly demonstrated values that were more powerful than wealth, fame, or influence. The boy added another detail that struck Mr. Hargrave even harder: he didn't want anyone to know, sir. Not me, not you, not even his teachers. He wanted the act itself to matter more than anything else. Mr. Hargrave leaned back, overwhelmed by the realization that his son had performed this act purely out of care for someone else, without expecting attention or praise. It was a level of selflessness that few adults ever reached, and yet his son had done it effortlessly, almost naturally. The revelation made him think about the kind of lessons he had tried to teach his son through words, rewards, and instructions, and how often they paled in comparison to the lesson his son had taught through action. He felt a mixture of pride, guilt, and a deep admiration that left him speechless. He realized that true character is shown not by wealth or status, but by simple, selfless choices, made quietly and sincerely. Mr. Hargrave looked at the boy, the messenger of this story, and felt a sense of gratitude, knowing that he had delivered more than just a report. He had delivered the truth about his son, about humanity, and about the power of small, meaningful acts. He understood that this revelation was more than a story. It was a lesson he would carry for the rest of his life, a reminder that generosity, empathy, and thoughtfulness are far more valuable than anything money can buy. The boy finished, "That's why I came, sir. So you could know what your son did, and see how much he cares." Mr. Hargrave sat in silence, taking in every word, the enormity of the situation slowly settling into his heart. He realized that this single act, a shirt given, a life touched, a lesson quietly taught, had already changed the way he viewed his son, and perhaps even the way he viewed the world. For the first time in a long time, Mr. Hargrave felt a sense of humility, of awe, and of deep emotional connection to his family. He knew that the story of this small, worn shirt and the boy who brought it to him was more than just an event. It was a revelation that would shape his values, his choices, and his understanding of what truly matters in life. And as he looked at the boy, still standing patiently, he realized that this revelation was not the end, but the beginning of a transformation, a shift in perspective that would leave him, his son, and even the boy forever changed. A simple act of kindness had become a powerful lesson, one that no amount of money could ever replicate. After the boy had left, Mr. Hargrave sat in his grand office, staring at the worn shirt lying on his desk. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the city outside, yet inside, his mind was alive with thoughts, feelings, and reflections. He felt as if the ordinary office walls had suddenly become a space for extraordinary truths. He thought about his son, a child he had always admired from afar but never fully understood. The revelation of the shirt and its story made him realize that he had underestimated the depth of his child's compassion. The boy's simple act, and the message he had delivered, had forced Mr. Hargrave to pause and reconsider what truly mattered in life. For the first time in years, he questioned the world he had built for himself, a life filled with luxury, power, and material success. He had always believed that wealth was the ultimate measure of achievement, yet here was a child, his own son, teaching him that generosity, empathy, and thoughtfulness were far more valuable than gold, diamonds, or titles. He remembered the man in the park, cold and tired, receiving the shirt with gratitude, and it struck him how easily one small act could create a ripple of change. One shirt, one gesture, had touched a life, and now it had touched his own heart. He realized that he had been blind to such opportunities for connection, focused too much on his own world and too little on the lives around him. Mr. Hargrave reflected on how many times he had ignored or overlooked moments like this in his own life, the countless times he had passed by someone in need, too busy to notice, too distracted to act. The realization was painful, yet enlightening, and he felt a quiet determination growing inside him, a desire to be different, to be better, to live with awareness and compassion. He thought about the boy who had delivered the shirt, the messenger of his son's quiet generosity, and felt gratitude for the courage it took to share the story honestly. The young boy had not only carried a piece of clothing but also a lesson, a mirror reflecting values Mr. Hargrave had neglected, and he understood that the true gift was not the shirt itself, but the moral courage, the empathy, and the thoughtfulness it represented. As he continued to reflect, Mr. Hargrave realized something profound. His son had done more than just perform an act of kindness. He had inspired change, not only for the recipient of the shirt but for him as well. the boy's story had opened his eyes to a world beyond wealth, beyond appearances, a world where even the smallest gestures could have the deepest impact. He thought about how he had measured life's success in numbers, contracts, and achievements, and he saw now how limited that view had been. Real success, he understood, was measured in moments of compassion, honesty, and empathy, in the lives touched, the hearts healed, and the goodness shared quietly without expectation. Mr. Hargrave felt a sense of humility he hadn't felt in years. His son, through a simple shirt and a small act of kindness, had shown him the power of integrity and the beauty of selfless giving. He realized that he wanted to live differently, to notice, to care, and to act with the same quiet strength and courage his son had shown. He sat back in his chair, closing his eyes briefly, and felt a shift within himself, something subtle yet undeniable. The revelation of the shirt, the story the boy had shared, had changed the way he saw not only his son, but life itself. It was a moment of awakening, a turning point, where awareness and reflection became the foundation for a better, more compassionate future. In that quiet, reflective moment, Mr. Hargrave understood that the world could be changed one small act at a time, and that even in his busy life of wealth and power, he could contribute meaningfully. He felt a renewed sense of purpose, a desire to notice, to act, and to value what truly mattered. His son had taught him a lesson no amount of money could buy, and it was a lesson he would carry forever. And as he looked at the shirt on his desk once more, he smiled softly, knowing that from this moment forward, he would never see such gestures as ordinary again, for in that simple fabric, he had found a reflection of humanity, kindness, and the enduring power of love and empathy. The next morning, Mr. Hargrave woke up with a feeling he hadn't experienced in years, a quiet warmth in his chest, a sense of clarity, and a newfound awareness of the small, powerful things in life. He looked around his lavish mansion, with its polished floors, expensive furniture, and priceless art, and suddenly, all of it seemed less important. He realized that no amount of wealth or luxury could replace the lessons he had learned from a worn shirt and the honest words of a young boy. As he walked through the halls, memories of the previous day kept coming back, the boy standing there, holding the shirt, the story of his son's quiet act of kindness, and the way that simple gift had carried so much meaning. It struck him how something so small could create such a profound impact, not only on the recipient of the shirt, but on him as well. He felt his heart opening in a way that had been closed for too long. Mr. Hargrave thought about his son with fresh eyes, remembering how he had always admired the boy's curiosity, intelligence, and playful spirit, but now he saw something deeper: compassion, empathy, and moral courage, qualities that many adults spend a lifetime trying to master. He felt a surge of pride, not for his son's achievements, but for the purity of his heart. The realization that his child had done something so meaningful without seeking praise or reward filled him with awe. As he reflected, Mr. Hargrave felt a quiet shame for the times he had overlooked such values, too busy chasing wealth, status, and recognition to notice the simple opportunities to do good. He realized that his own perspective on life had been narrow, focused on what could be measured and displayed, rather than what truly mattered: kindness, empathy, and genuine human connection. The revelation hit him like a gentle wave, washing over him with clarity and insight. He remembered the man in the park, receiving the shirt with gratitude and a smile, and realized how deeply such small gestures could touch a life. It was a moment of awakening for him, a reminder that love and compassion do not require grandeur, they require intention, awareness, and a willingness to act selflessly. The act of giving, done quietly and sincerely, carried a power that wealth alone could never achieve. From that moment, Mr. Hargrave began to notice the world differently. He saw opportunities to help, to care, and to connect in ways he had ignored for years. Every interaction became meaningful, every moment a chance to make a positive impact. He started thinking about ways to teach these values to his family, to model empathy, and to act with intention rather than expectation. The emotional transformation went deeper than thoughts. It reached his soul, reshaping his understanding of success, happiness, and purpose. He realized that life was not about accumulation or status, but about the ripples one creates through small, meaningful acts, and how these ripples can extend far beyond imagination. Mr. Hargrave felt a sense of liberation, as if a weight he hadn't noticed for years had been lifted, replaced by gratitude, awareness, and a renewed sense of humanity. He decided that he would act differently. Starting immediately, he would no longer ignore the small chances to help, the overlooked opportunities to care, and the moments to teach kindness by example. He wanted to embody the lesson his son had taught, to live with awareness and compassion, and to nurture the values that truly matter. As the day went on, Mr. Hargrave found himself smiling more, noticing people he had previously ignored, offering kind words, and thinking carefully about how he could contribute in meaningful ways. He even thought about visiting the man in the park, not for recognition, but simply to witness the impact of kindness firsthand. The lesson from the worn shirt had become a guiding principle, transforming his emotions, perspective, and intentions. By evening, he felt a profound connection with his son, understanding him in a way he never had before. He no longer saw his child as just a boy, but as a teacher, a guide, and an example of the values that truly matter in life. The emotional transformation was complete, subtle yet powerful, quiet yet undeniable, and it touched every corner of his being. Mr. Hargrave realized that this transformation was not temporary, it was permanent, a fundamental shift in how he would live, act, and relate to the world, and as he gazed at the shirt lying neatly on his desk, he understood its true value, not as a piece of clothing, but as a symbol of empathy, integrity, and the extraordinary power of simple, selfless acts. Days passed since the boy had left Mr. Hargrave's office, yet the impact of that single visit lingered, leaving a mark on the millionaire's heart that would not fade. The shirt, now neatly folded on his desk, had become far more than a piece of clothing. It had become a symbol, a reminder, and a lesson. He looked at it every morning and remembered the quiet courage of his son and the boy who had delivered the story. Mr. Hargrave found himself noticing the world differently, seeing opportunities to help, to give, and to care where before he had only seen routine and business. The simplest gestures, a smile, a kind word, a small gift, suddenly carried immense value, and he understood that these were the moments that truly mattered, far more than wealth or luxury. He began taking small steps to act on this realization, reaching out to neighbors, donating quietly to those in need, and teaching his son that his actions had inspired him. The lessons were no longer abstract concepts, they were alive, flowing through his daily life, shaping his interactions, and guiding his decisions. Each act, no matter how small, became a ripple, spreading goodness and compassion beyond what he could measure. The relationship between Mr. Hargrave and his son grew stronger, richer, and deeper. He saw his child not only as a son but as a teacher, a model of integrity, and a living example of what it means to act with a selfless heart. They began sharing small moments together, talking about kindness, noticing the struggles of others, and planning little acts of generosity that could brighten someone's day. The father realized that these shared lessons were far more valuable than any inheritance, luxury, or material gift. Even his friends and colleagues noticed a change in him. He no longer measured success by profit or status alone, but by the lives he touched and the positive impact he created. People were drawn to his warmth, his genuine concern, and his ability to listen and act without seeking attention. The transformation was subtle but undeniable, like a quiet flame spreading light into every corner of his life. Mr. Hargrave also reflected on the power of honesty and courage. Remembering the young boy who had delivered the shirt and the story so truthfully, he realized that it takes bravery to share a story, to carry a message, and to act with sincerity, whether rich or poor, young or old. The courage to care and to speak the truth could change lives in ways beyond imagination. The impact of that single act, his son giving a shirt to someone in need, reached far beyond what Mr. Hargrave had ever anticipated. It was not just a lesson for him, it was a lesson for everyone around him, a reminder that every small gesture, every act of kindness, has the power to inspire, to teach, and to transform. He understood that the true value of life is measured not in possessions, but in compassion, honesty, and empathy. From that moment onward, Mr. Hargrave made a quiet promise to himself, to live with intention, to notice, and to act. He would never again underestimate the power of a small act, and he would never forget that the heart of humanity can be revealed in the simplest ways. Whether it is a shirt, a smile, or a helping hand, the impact is immeasurable when it comes from love and sincerity. And as he looked at the shirt one last time before placing it in a special drawer, he smiled, knowing that it had changed his life forever. It was a reminder that sometimes the smallest gestures carry the biggest lessons, that kindness and empathy can ripple through the world in ways we cannot always see, and that children, through their honesty, courage, and compassion, can teach even the most experienced adults the true meaning of life. In the end, the story of a simple shirt became a story of transformation, connection, and hope, a story that would stay with Mr. Hargrave, his son, and even the boy who delivered the message forever, a story that proved that real change begins with small acts of love, honesty, and selflessness, leaving an impact that lasts far longer than wealth, fame, or status ever could.